What's going on, folks? This is part two of a serious conversation about abuse. Forgive me if the first time, I seemed a little nervous because this is a sensitive subject, and it may not be the easiest to talk about because, you know, it is a hurtful thing to go through when somebody's, being abused or facing abuse, or you're on the outside looking in, especially trying to put into context somebody else's abuse, especially when it's not your own. So in this conversation, I'll make the attempt to really just talk about, different things people go through, when they're being abused. Last time I spoke about the different types of abuse. Some of them financial, sexual, physical, psychological, emotional. Just some of the things that people go through, spiritual, and just some of the signs. Isolation, jealousy, blaming, all kind of stuff like that. But this is just more so about the feelings that people go through. Just from people I've spoken to, things that I've seen, stuff that I've encountered over my many years. People go through, certain anxieties, certain fears. It is isolation that sets in as far as people not being trusting. And 90 Glock says, have you been abused? Well, I mean, you could say emotionally. I've had that type of thing. Or verbally, a person can be abused. I think we've all been abused, verbally at some point, or have abused other people at some point verbally. Yeah. And I just got a text message from somebody on the live stream. I'll get to that after this. And what I'm going to say about this, it is just a tense situation as far as what people go through. Like I said, just to put it into context, is the victim shaming part of abuse. You know, it's just like you go to a point where, at least from what I'm hearing from certain people that have been abused and go through things, you don't know where to turn to, you don't know who to trust, and then the people that you may feel comfortable turning to or trust, how do you know that these folks are not going to turn around and then judge you? Because sometimes people get judged as the victim of abuse, and there's victim shaming, and people made to feel like they're less than, depending on who was doing the abusing against them. If it's a powerful individual, be it a politician, be it a famous athlete, actor, it can be rough. It can be a situation where you're wondering if there's anybody that cares, if there's anybody that gives a darn about what you're going through. And I think sometimes people really don't grasp the whole picture, especially when you're not experiencing what that abuse is. Be it somebody being raped. It's like somebody being raped, and you've never experienced that before. Who are you? Who am I to tell that person how they feel and how quickly they can overcome that? And Evelyn says, And what I'm just talking about is just different things that people feel, when they're in situations of abuse, certain isolations that they go through, certain feelings of hopelessness and stuff like that that may come, not knowing where to turn to, not knowing who to trust, not knowing if it's safe to talk about your situation, the feeling of not wanting to be judged, because, who wants to come to somebody and tell them about what they're going through, and then the first thing that happens is folks are judging you. Or in certain situations, you have people who want to give advice, and I'm guilty of that at times. Sometimes it's best to just listen. So I say to anybody on the opposite end of the situation that has somebody that comes to you and is actually telling you about their situation, be it, some form of abuse or whatever that they went through, physical, mental, spiritual, whatever it is, the best thing to do is just to listen, if you care, if you're concerned. Because sometimes when we hear people's problems, we figure we have advice, so we could tell folks what to do or what to go through. And again, I've been asked by Evelyn, have I been abused? Well, I mean, it depends, on what you're talking about as it pertains to abuse. Yeah, I just answered my brother in the live stream. I mean, people who have faced all forms of abuse, as far as verbally, emotionally. I mean, I've been played with or toyed with emotionally, verbally, and whatnot. People face different forms of abuse. If you watch my first live stream, I talked about the different forms of abuse. People may feel like Evelyn says, "Hey, brother." I guess she's talking to you, 90 Glock. The thing is, people face different forms of abuse, and what I try not to do, as I gotten older and more mature, is not to say, okay, just because you've been physically abused, that is no possibility that the verbal or mental abuse a person face is not as important as the physical abuse. Yeah, I may not have been physically abused or face any physical abuse, but I've been verbally abused before. You've probably been verbally abused before, emotionally, or whatever the case may be. It's just about learning to cope with it and not basically diminishing anybody else's abuse. I'm not going to say one is less than or more than the other. Some are more, are traumatic, of course. Just like somebody being raped or somebody being beat up. And Evelyn says, "Have you been an abuser? In what way? I mean, because I verbally have said things to people, that I'm not proud of. Yeah, have I ever verbally abused somebody? You get mad and things happen, and you'll be in a situation. I've done that. Not proud of that, but those things happen. Like I said, I try to apologize for any verbal abuse that I may have ever given anybody. It's not something that I practice, but abuse comes in different forms. I'm not somebody who's apt to be an abuser and whatnot, but like I said, these different things happen. And 90 Glock says, "Hello, Evelyn." I guess y'all want to have your own side conversation, but yeah, I'm just trying to get into the real, feelings or emotions, even some sort of psychology of what people go through when they get abused. Withdrawing from society, lack of trust, a fear of judgment, those things that come to bear. And I think when a person is going through abuse, just as my personal opinion, my thoughts on the matter, is that they shouldn't be judged, for whatever they're going through. Even though in society we tend to judge people, based on a myriad of things: how they look, how they act, how they smell, whatever the case may be, and then even how they're abused. And I think it's a situation where, if somebody comes to you and they're talking about some type of abuse or something that they face, be it you, the person on the opposite end, you should be willing to listen. If not, I say don't do that person a disservice by first trying to judge them and give advice and things of that nature. On the other side of it, I say to the person being abused, it's important to try to find somebody to talk to, and let yourself be heard, and find somebody that's willing to help and whatnot, and know that there are people out there that care. But it is a situation where you have to be careful who you trust, who you talk to. And I'm getting another text message, during this live stream. But yeah, for the most part, it is a touchy situation. Miss Amy, Mrs. Ray, the Explorer. Oh, it says, "Hello, everyone." Yeah, Amy, I'm just talking about abuse and different things that people face. This is the second part of a larger conversation that I was having about abuse and the fears, the anxieties that people go through. Isolation, loneliness. It's just crazy what people go through, and then the judgment that comes. When a person is abused and they're trying to just basically put it all together. Sometimes, just at least from what I've heard or what I've, experienced with people, their life gets shattered, depending on the type of abuse that they face. And all abuse is important. It's important to address. It's important when people go through different things, just to try to put their life back together. Some people recover quicker than others. But just because some people recover quicker than others doesn't mean there's something wrong with that particular person. It just means that everybody takes in their situations differently. And the person shouldn't be judged because they've been abused, or victim shamed because they've been abused. And sometimes that happens, by the accuser, not by the accuser. That sometimes that happens by the person being accused towards the accuser. Mrs. Ray says, thank you for talking about this. Well, yeah, Free Music asked me to talk about this, and I'm somebody who's a proponent of talking about abuse anyway. So I believe that, it's wrong to abuse anybody, for whatever reason. You should treat people like human beings with dignity, with civility, with respect. But when the abuse happens, just know that it is very harmful, it's very effective, and tearing a person's life apart. 90 Glock says, I think people should look for solutions on how not to be an abuser or when to be abused. That does not reflect on others. Well, yeah, we should look into solutions about, how not to abuse, and I'll get into that in the next and final part of this conversation. This is just talking about the feelings that people may feel or emotions people may go through, of loss, anxiety, stress, fear, trepidation, just about dealing with society, especially, a rape or a sexual assault victim. You can't expect that person to just inculcate themselves or just, go back into society like nothing happened. A person that's, a victim of sexual assault, rape, or something like that really has a hard time. They're almost on the level of PTSD, traumatic stress disorder, so it's really something, what I'm saying. Words matter, how we speak to people, how we treat folks. It affects people. I mean, even if, and what I've seen, even if it doesn't affect you as harshly as it may affect one person, it doesn't mean that psychologically it's not seeping in the back of your mind. It doesn't mean that when somebody else does something that reminds you of what the abuser did to you, that you don't feel it. A flashback could come, and then in the middle of a day, you can automatically, have a great sense of fear, or, be standoffish, or back up, and say, what, maybe I'm not comfortable in this situation because of something that happened to you that had nothing to do with that particular situation you're in that day. A personality trait from somebody can just spark a memory and have you just like, wow, what's going on here? So something that can happen to you physically can also affect you psychologically, emotionally. And it doesn't even have to be in the moment. It could be something that happened to you 10 years ago, and somebody reminds you of something that happened 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what's going on? And my thing is just that these fears, these emotions, these things, if you ever in the presence of somebody that's being abused or been abused or facing abuse or whatever, they need to be acknowledged. If anything I tell somebody to do when somebody comes to you and they've been abused and they're talking to you, first, treat that delicately, because that means they really trust you. That's not something that you just push away or toss to the side or disregard or whatever. I say don't judge the person for what they've been through or what happened, or try to question them about it. Find out what's going on. First listen, then I say reflect the emotions of what's happening, and move on from there. But I do have to talk about the ugly side of well, it's all ugly, but I also have to talk about one of the ugliest sides of the abuse spectrum is when folks force accuse. Because when you force accuse somebody, that can tear their life up too. It's just like, somebody who says they were a rape victim and, it was just to get back at the person, Now you tear the person's reputation and life up just because you felt like it was something that was okay, like i.e. crying wolf. And that's never cool, because it just brings out one of the worst, horrible sides of that whole situation. Because once you're accused of being a pedophile, once you're accused of being a rapist, once you're accused of being an abuser, and you're not, that is a hard mantle, or a hard jacket, as the old timers say, to take off. You can't just shake that off, especially when the authorities are involved, especially when you're in a court of public opinion. People are always seeing you and always judging you, so it cuts both ways. An accuser can be judged harshly, because people may not believe. And 90 Glock says, find a solution. True, you find a solution, but the key before you find a solution is acknowledging the situation, be it right, be it wrong, be it good, be it bad, whatever it is. You acknowledge what's going on, you acknowledge the emotion, you acknowledge what happened. I mean, you don't rush to a solution first before you find out what's going on with a particular individual. Be it a mental situation, a verbal, mental, verbal, emotional, or physical, spiritual, whatever the abuse is, financial. You find out what's going on. You assess the situation, and then if the person is ready for a solution, I'll say that too. You can't give a person a solution that they're not ready for. You can't make people hear a conversation that they don't want to hear. You can't have a person have this dialogue with you that they don't want to, even on this live stream. I'm talking about abuse. There's some people that may be turned off by this conversation, that don't want to hear this conversation, that don't want to be involved in this particular situation. And my thing is, look, be delicate with folks. Be respectful. Be first willing to understand. First listen to understand, then listen to be heard. So my thing is, don't jump to conclusions when somebody's coming to tell you about abuse. Don't act like you know what's going on, because you don't know. Especially me even talking about this thing about abuse. I'm not no expert on abuse. I'm just a concerned person talking about a topic that I was asked to talk about, and something that I actually care about, especially with knowing people who've been through abuse and stuff like that. And I care about what folks go through. So I say to anybody out there, don't pretend like you know what a person has been through when they go through a particular level of abuse. Even if, you've experienced abuse on some level yourself. Unless you're in that particular situation at that moment with that person, or you've actually been through that exact same thing, it's best to just listen. It's best to ask if there's any way that you can help, and then if that person gives you an end, a leaflet, a branch, then you can start to begin to talk about some type of solutions, some type of way forward. But before that, a person's emotions have to be acknowledged. A person has to be, able to trust, able to put themselves in a situation where they can confide in you, because trust is also a big issue too. A person doesn't want to come to you thinking that it's okay to talk to you about an abusive situation, and then all of a sudden, you're gossiping about it, or making fun of it, or belittling them and diminishing them as if it's some kind of game. Because I'll say to anybody out there, abuse in any form is never a game. Especially when it comes to the physical, the sexual abuse, especially when it's something with children or the elderly or the vulnerable of society. It's never okay. It's never fun. It's not a joke. It's not a game. It's not a trivial event. It's not something that you just pass by, sweep under the rug. A lot of us may never know what folks who've really been abused go through. I'm just making an attempt to identify some of the emotions of fear, anxiety, hurt, loss, angst, hurt, maybe a feeling of revenge, just a betrayal. 90 Glock says, yes, my brother. I just say when it comes to abuse that people face, it's not a game. It's not a joke. I'm saying? It's not one thing to just be like, okay, fine. And if you've been an abuser, I say to anybody out there, you've been an abuser, be aware of how you've affected the person that you've abused, because you could have ultimately shattered somebody's life. especially in the fact of a child. You know, when it comes to a child, you know, somebody who's molested or raped or even murdered a child. You know, you may have tore a whole family apart. You may have, you know, hurt a community. You know, you've done irreversible damage. Sometimes with abuse, we do irreversible damage. You know, things that only prayer and God, you know, can solve. You know, if you believe in that. But I just wanted to acknowledge these things because, you know, they need to be acknowledged. They need to be talked about. Yes, even on YouTube. I'm not saying, you know, we're not going to get back to other conversations. We're going to have other conversations. But this issue of abuse is something that's important. And I'm not going to talk too long. I'm actually going to get ready to wrap this up as the trucks keep going by. And I think anybody I think anybody and everybody who came into the live stream, who commented, I appreciate the folks who will watch this after, you know, it goes off the air and it's to the upload. And this is a serious subject that I encourage people to take seriously, you know, to understand when folks come to you and they're abused. First, you know, listen. Just seek to understand what's going on. Reflect the emotions. Ask questions where necessary. But also, too, be understanding that it's a hard thing when somebody comes to you about a situation where they've been abused. And it's not something to take lightly. And next time, in third and final part of this conversation, I will make an attempt to get in some type of solutions and resources that people can use when it comes to being abused. Take care.